Inflation hits a new 20-year high, but it's not all bad news. Federal Parliament is back and the fight over the building watchdog takes centre stage, and the buy now pay later sector surges with Sezzle's share price doubling in just 5 hours. It's Thursday, the 28th of July, 2022. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael. I'm still coming to terms with the big debate yesterday.
Goodness me, haven't we had an extraordinary reaction to it?
We sure have. We had Stephen Koukoulas, our resident economist, versus Chris Joy. Chris is an economist that writes for the Australian Financial Review. It was great. They disagreed on how far the housing market would fall. They had a great discussion about the Reserve Bank. It just kept going. It's fantastic.
Absolutely. And obviously it's kind of gone on and on and on. And these two are sparring partners from Twitter and various other places as well. So the debate has then kind of spilled over into social media as well. So if you haven't heard it yet, go back and have a listen to it. It was released about 24 hours ago, so you'll be able to find it there on the Fear and Greed playlist. It is the great housing debate, and it is well worth a listen. And while you're there, while you're picking out other things to listen to, things are a little bit different. Safe Word by Fear and Greed comes out today. Every Thursday you can get a new episode of Safe Word by Fear and Greed. It is, as we've discussed, Sean, our business adjacent podcast, really, isn't it?
Business adjacent, yeah. A lot adjacent, and there's a big gap between business and what we talk about, I'd suggest.
It actually doesn't feel right to say, go and listen to Christopher Joy and Stephen Koukoulas talking about housing prices, and then say, go and listen to Safe Word by Fear and Greed, because those two could not be further apart, could they?
Yeah. Same audience, maybe not, I don't know.
That's right. But anyway, give them both a listen, and I guarantee, and this is a strong guarantee, you will not regret it. Anyway, the main...
Well, no, hold on, Michael. We've still got... Don't forget, we've also got Sherelle Murphy today.
Oh, goodness me.
I had a chat with her about inflation. And that's straight after this podcast. So you've got to go back and listen to the housing debate. You've got to listen to Sherelle on inflation straight after this. We've got Safe Word out. It's Jackie, my partner's birthday. What a day.
I love the fact that you managed to just slip that in there just so seamlessly.
Jack is a regular listener, and I'm not going to tell her that I've mentioned her, and I'd imagine when she's driving to work this morning, she'll ring me straight up afterwards and say, why did you tell everyone it was my birthday?
Oh, well, happy birthday, Jackie.
Thank you.
From both of us now. This is now a joint gift. So I've just jumped on board there. All right. Now I'm going to move on to the main story this morning, Sean. We've talked a lot about the other things you can listen to. But first, before you do any of that, listen to this show because we've got a lot to cover. The main story, inflation jumped by 6.1% in the 12 months to the end of June, with rising fuel prices and home building costs eating into household budgets.
It was the biggest annual rise since the introduction of the GST back in 2000. It followed on from the 5.1% jump the month before. Now, the number is very high, but not as high as some economists had tipped. And it's still well below the pace of inflation in other economies like the United States, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. It was broad-based, with about 2/3 of categories reporting higher prices. That's larger than normal. Now, the underlying rate of inflation, which takes out volatile items and is preferred by the Reserve Bank, was 4.9%. That was up sharply from 3.7% for the 12 months to the end of May. So it's 4.9% for the 12 months to the end of June. Now, the underlying rate didn't include the GST back in 2000. So the figure we've just received is the highest core reading or underlying reading since 1991.
So what then does it mean in terms of inflation? How many more big numbers like this are we actually going to see?
Well, really, that's the question everyone would like to know the answer to. Among market economists, the view seems to be that inflation will climb even higher during the current September quarter, but that might be the peak. Federal Treasurer Jim Chalmers yesterday said that we're probably a couple of quarters away from the peak. There are signs that some of the supply chain issues are being sorted. Freight costs, for example, are falling. Oil prices have also come off a bit with other commodities. The notable exception there, of course, is gas. The disruption to fresh food from the East Coast floods has peaked. Hopefully it's peaked. Hopefully we don't get any more rain. So some of the price pressure is definitely coming off. It's still flowing through the economy, but hopefully by the end of the year, these big numbers, around 6% or 7%, will actually drop back to more normal numbers.
All right. The other big question, of course, Sean, is what does it mean for interest rates?
Well, the Reserve Bank Board meets next Tuesday, and the majority of economists expect it will lift the official cash rate by another 50 basis points. That would be 4 meetings in a row to 1.85%. There's a decent chance the bank could go 75 basis points. Bond markets are priced in a cash rate sometime next year of 3.5%. That would mean many, many more rate rises in coming months, but certainly they're likely to lift rates next Tuesday.
All right. How did the local markets react to the inflation news yesterday?
Well, initially there wasn't a lot of reaction, and by the end of the day, the S&P ASX 200 finished up 0.2% to 6,823 points. That's about the highest close in 6 weeks, but some sectors certainly benefited, notably the banks. Commonwealth Bank ended up 2.3% yesterday. Westpac closed 1.6% higher, and National Australia Bank was up 1.4%. CSL and Transurban both ended 2% higher. The big miners fell back, with BHP, Fortescue Metals and Rio Tinto all down sharply. James Hardie Industries also fell quite sharply. Zipco did really well. More of that in a moment. Western Australia gold producer Silver Lake Resources also did well. Some of the miners, though, were among the worst performers. Iron ore group Champion Iron closed down 4.3%, and mineral sands group Iluka Resources was off 4%. Michael, away from equities, the bond market reacted to the news. Now, the bond market tends to be a pretty good predictor of future rates, and it pared back expectations of rate rises. Same thing happened in the currency market. The Aussie dollar fell back a bit. It's now trading around 69.5 US cents. What that tells us is that investors in those bond and currency markets thought that inflation could have been higher than what it printed yesterday.
All right, there is plenty happening. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, I might be a little bit biased because I love politics, but it was great to see Parliament back in action yesterday. Question time, the argy-bargy, new legislation, more focus on the Greens than at any time over the past 9 years because, of course, they hold the balance of power in the Senate.
Yes, there was plenty going on. Now, as is always the case with the new government, there was still plenty of blaming on the previous government anytime a question was asked about why is something wrong. Well, that's because you guys held government. There's a fair bit of that. The Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was forced to defend the scrapping of the Australian Building and Construction Commission. In fact, that was probably the main talking point from question time, the main issue yesterday. Opposition leader Peter Dutton pressed the Prime Minister on Labor's promise to cut power bills by $275 a year. That got quite a run. One thing about this Parliament, Michael, we'll see more questions from independents, which means potentially more policy issues will be raised during question time. Maybe I'm being hopeful, but wouldn't that be nice if we did see that? For example, yesterday, independent Andrew Wilkie asked about the indexation of HECS causing a spike in debt for university graduates. Now, that one is very unlikely to have gotten a run unless independents were asking questions. There was also a bunch of legislation introduced yesterday. Notably, Labor introduced its climate change legislative package, which enshrines the government's 43% emissions reduction target into law.
And Sean, Pauline Hanson got a moment in the spotlight too.
She stormed out of the Senate during an acknowledgement to country because she considers it divisive and disenfranchising. When respect was paid to elders past and present, Ms Hanson yelled out, "No, I won't and I never will," before leaving. Afterwards, she said she was tipped over the edge by a motion that would see the Aboriginal flag displayed in the Senate. Don't know what to say about that one.
Oh, right. Okay. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, Sean, also met with the US Ambassador to Australia, Caroline Kennedy.
She started the job late last week, and of course, she's the daughter of former US President John F. Kennedy. She was briefed by Mr. Albanese on the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and he discussed his hopes of establishing an Indigenous voice to Parliament. The pair also discussed the ANZUS alliance, the outlook for the Indo-Pacific region, and new areas of possible cooperation, including climate change. Ms. Kennedy passed on the best wishes of US President Joe Biden and the White House's optimism about the next chapter in bilateral relations.
All right, moving on from politics, Sean, Westpac has decided to reduce its exposure to oil, gas and power companies.
Yeah, it's a dilemma for the banks. They make money funding big projects worth billions of dollars by the energy sector. But should they? given their claims to be environmentally responsible. Westpac Chief Executive Peter King yesterday said the bank will balance energy security against its stricter lending standards for oil and gas. The bank has pledged to reduce its exposure to fossil fuels by 25%, and it will look at new oil and gas fields on a case-by-case basis. Mr. King said having a credible plan to move the most emissions-intensive industries towards net zero was needed to help businesses secure funding.
The bank also said it was close to offering 10-minute mortgage approvals.
Yes, that would really help those of us who have previously bought a house on impulse. Anyway, Westpac has completed the digitisation of its mortgage approval process, and some customers will be able to receive unconditional offers within 10 minutes by the end of the year. ANZ is on that track too. National Australian Bank and Commonwealth Bank aren't there yet, but it's pretty incredible, really.
Yeah, I remember when you talk about buying a house on impulse, I remember seeing on one of those, like The Block or one of those kind of things, but years ago, and it was apparently bought by someone who was just riding his bike past the auction and decided to jump in and join in at the auction. And it just got into my head that, are there people out there who actually just buy a house on impulse? Well, now, if they want to, they can.
They can, that's right.
All right. Now, just still on Westpac, Sean, it's looking at reducing branches as some St. George branches take space in Westpac branches.
Yes, the bank has already co-located 21 branches and is looking at 100 more. It means that customers of Bank SA, St. George, Bank of Melbourne, BT, Rams can potentially use a Westpac branch.
Okay. Rio Tinto has halved its interim dividend, even though it posted a better than expected profit of $8.6 billion.
Not bad. Remember, not as good as last year, though. Last year, the big miners handed out huge dividends after iron ore prices hit a record high, but it looks like that might not be the case this year, given lower iron ore prices and a more uncertain outlook thanks to China. Rio's half-year result, announced last night, was down 29%. The result was hampered by a slowdown in production ahead of the Winter Olympic Games in Beijing. Remember, they wanted to make sure the air was clear, so they closed factories. Also, there's been a slowdown in Chinese industrial activity across its suite of production. Rio sold 1.8% less iron ore, it's not bad, 9% less aluminium, and 31% fewer diamonds.
Oh, 31% fewer diamonds.
There you go.
That's an interesting stat.
Yeah.
All right. Something unusual is going on, Sean, in the buy now, pay later world, with Sezzle's share price doubling yesterday, triggering a trading halt.
Yeah, this sort of price action is very, very unusual. Sezzle was dumped at the altar by Zipco a couple of weeks ago, and in the past 5 days is up 213%. On opening yesterday, it fell slightly to 35 cents a share before reaching 70 cents a share about 5 hours later. Now, there's no news, just a lot of action. Eventually, trading was halted mid-afternoon pending a further announcement. Zipco climbed another 19% yesterday itself. It's up nearly 160% this month. Just very unusual activity.
Yeah, sure is. Regional Express's share price rose 2.5% yesterday after receiving pre-assessment clearance from the competition regulator for a fly-in, fly-out business. The
Australian Competition and Consumer Commission doesn't want to conduct a public review of the $48 million purchase of the FIFO business known as National Jet Express. Good news for Rex.
Indeed. Moving on to overseas news now, Sean. US President Joe Biden is expected to talk to Chinese President Xi Jinping over the next 24 hours as fresh tensions over Taiwan emerge.
Media reports suggest that the two will talk for the first time since March. And of course, it comes as House Speaker Nancy Pelosi apparently is planning to visit Taiwan. China considers Taiwan as part of its territory, so a visit by such a senior US official is like a slap in the face. The reports say that US officials want the call to be a continuation of efforts to maintain open lines of communication. Let's hope so.
The International Monetary Fund has significantly downgraded its outlook for the global economy for the second time in just 3 months, Sean, as inflation and rapidly rising interest rates slow activity.
The IMF forecasts growth of just 3.2% this year and 2.9% next year. The slowdown largely reflects weakening US, China and Eurozone economies. Rising food and energy prices also prompted an upward revision to the global inflation outlook, with price growth expected to reach 6.6% in advanced economies, up almost a full percentage point. That's a lot. Local Treasurer Jim Chalmers used the IMF World Economic Outlook update to warn that the international economy was entering a difficult phase.
All right, now I love this next story because we get to hear about some of the best-known brands and companies in the world. There's been a bunch of earnings results out from around the globe in the past 48 hours, and while the global economy is softening, it isn't a disaster.
Yeah, I think that's right. Microsoft missed June quarter earnings expectations as a strong US dollar and a slowdown in PC sales hurt. Its cloud business also disappointed, but the company expects revenue and earnings to grow at a double-digit pace over the next year. That's pretty good. Google parent Alphabet said ad sales growth had slowed markedly, but the drop was less than Twitter and Snap reported last week. Visa's profit jumped, boosted by a surge in spending from travellers and a strong performance in the US, while another All-American, GM, General Motors, disappointed as it battled with supply chain disruptions. Perhaps most interesting were earnings from Coca-Cola and McDonald's. Both said costs were rising, but they were able to recoup that by pushing up prices. So their bottom lines weren't really hurt. It was the same story from British-based Unilever. It said pretty much the same thing. Higher costs, but it can pass that through to consumers. All in all, it does show cost pressures, but business isn't hurting too much because it can push those prices on.
All right, there we go. Up next, Sean, is the Fear and Greed Daily interview, and today you're speaking with Sherelle Murphy from EY.
Yes, she gives us a one-on-one on what's happening with those inflation figures we were talking about early on, what it means for the economy. And, what was really interesting with Sherelle was how business should think about what's happening in the economy.
Yeah, Sherelle is a terrific communicator when it comes to this kind of issue. And that's coming up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. And don't forget that other kind of listening homework, really. You've got the housing debate from yesterday. That's a must listen. And Safe Word by Fear and Greed. That lives on its own, out on its own playlist. So you have to search for that one wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Thursday, the 28th of July, 2022. Make sure you're following the podcast and join us online on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.